Battle over birthright citizenship. I listened to the entire Supreme Court oral argument, so you didn't have to. So what do I think is going to happen? Let's go. I'll tell you, if you drank every time you heard the word domicile today, you would need a new liver. That much I can tell you. I picked the wrong week to stop drinking to the word domicile. That's the only downside to this. I listened, because you can't watch. You listen to the oral arguments. Trump went to the Supreme Court today. First time an American president has ever went to the United States Supreme Court for an oral argument. History making. And he left in the middle of it because I'm sure he was bored as everybody else who was listening. But I'm fascinated by this stuff. This is my Super Bowl. So here's the big takeaway from everything. Clearly, the Supreme Court doesn't know what the phrase subject to the jurisdiction thereof means. And that was the essence of the argument today. So how do we get here? Well, when President Trump was campaigning years ago, he said this idea of birthright citizenship has to end. The idea that people can come over and cross the border illegally and have kids, and those kids are citizens, that's wrong. And then you have this whole tourism industry where you've got these Chinese companies, and there might be as many as 500 of them, which fund this birthright tourism where they come to America, they have a kid here, the kid's an American citizen, and they go back to China. So you heard a lot about allegiance to the country today. That came up. And you heard a lot about this idea of whether or not you want to be an American, but do you have to live in America? And what if you were living in America, but not by choice? And what if you were living in America, but you really didn't have a right to live in America, but you were still living in America and you want to live in America? There's a whole lot of that back and forth. The 14th Amendment to the Constitution, it's not as simple as it sounds. It's not as black and white, despite what my buddy Johnny Cook on X and I've been arguing with him about this, and I love Johnny. He's my libertarian friend, and he always keeps me honest. But on this one, he's quite wrong, because he said yesterday, the 14th Amendment means what it says, and I don't know why everybody's trying to change what it means. If you want to change what it means, then have a constitutional amendment. Well, it's not that easy. It's very similar to the Second Amendment and the phrase a well-regulated militia. When Justice Antonin Scalia wrote the majority opinion in the Heller case, he had to parse the language of what that meant at the time they wrote the Second Amendment. And they used the phrasing and the commas, and they used the clause, how they wrote back then, because that's what you do if you're looking at it from a textualist point of view. Not what it means in the year 2026. What did it mean at the time they ratified the Second Amendment? And the conclusion that Alito and the court reached was that in order to have a well-regulated militia, an individual needs the right to bear arms because the individuals comprise the militia. And therefore, the Second Amendment is an individual right to bear arms. It is not a right that is held to the militia, because we are the militia based on the writing of the Second Amendment at the time the amendment was ratified. Not what it means to the ACLU in the year 2025, what it meant when they ratified the United States Constitution, and specifically the Second Amendment. That's what you have to do. If you're a textualist, if you're an originalist, you have to look at the writing at the time the constitutional amendment or the law was passed. And they used different language back then, and they used different phrasing back then. Words don't mean the same thing necessarily in the 21st century as they did in the 18th century or the 19th century or even the 20th century, as we learn today. So at issue in this case are 5 words: subject to the jurisdiction within. Subject to the jurisdiction within. What does that mean? I don't know. I don't know what jurisdiction means. That's the point. Nobody really does in the year 2026 know what they meant in the 1860s when they wrote that. So they have to go back to the debates. They have to look at the papers. They have to look at the writings. They have to look at what the senators said back then. They have to look at the arguments that were raised in the newspapers by the Republicans and by the Confederates, who did not want the 14th Amendment passed. The goal, we know the goal. The goal was to make sure that slaves and their children would be citizens. Now freed slaves and their children would be United States citizens. That was the goal of the 14th Amendment, period. We also know that Indians were not included. Specifically, Indians were not included. Indians would not gain citizenship until many, many years later, actually till the next century. That would not happen until the next century, when they would pass, an entire Congress would pass a law granting full citizenship to Indians. And I will say, with the exception of, I think it was Justice Neil Gorsuch today, and maybe Justice Elena Kagan, they actually said the word Indians, and they didn't say Native Americans. There were like a couple slips where they said Native Americans, but that context matters because in the historical context, they were Indians. And specifically, Indians were excluded from this until they passed a law saying, yeah, you know what, Indians, you get constitutional citizenship. And there's a piece on this. On this day, all American Indians were made United States citizens. That was June 2nd, 1924, when President Calvin Coolidge signed into law the Indian Citizenship Act, which marked the end of a long debate and struggle over birthright citizenship for American Indians. Now, that came up a lot today, and the reason why it came up a lot today is because it's significant. Indians were considered to be sovereign nations. Indian tribal territories were considered to be sovereign nations. So the issue of subject to the jurisdiction thereof, at the time, Indian reservations, Indian nations were not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States of America. Why does that matter? Because as you're having this whole debate, they're talking about there were several clauses that were mapped out in a case that would be decided that would ultimately rule on birthright citizenship. And that is the case that was at the showdown today at the United States Supreme Court. But at the same time, the Solicitor General, John Sauer, is making it very clear, President Trump's executive order, they are not asking the Supreme Court to overturn that case. They're not asking the court to overturn that case. It's called Wong Kim Ark, U.S. v. Wong Kim Ark. That is the subject of the precedent for this case. He was a child born in the United States, parents of Chinese descent, who at the time of his birth were subjects of the Emperor of China, but had a permanent domicile and residence in the United States. That's why we heard the word domicile 18,000 freaking times today during oral arguments. Domicile, domicile, domicile. What does that mean? What does domicile mean? And this whole idea of loyalty to the United States, the parents went back to China. So even though they were here and Wong Kim Ark, this guy was ruled that he would be a citizen because he was born in U.S. soil, the parents didn't have allegiance to America. They had a domicile here and they were permanent residents, but then they left and went back to China. So the issue becomes, what if you're not loyal to the United States? What if you are? So what if you come into this country illegally, but you are loyal to the United States? Interestingly enough, the real issue of what used to be a term known as anchor babies, which is, I guess now is considered a racist term, but that was a term that was used in federal court cases over years and years and years. This notion that you cross the border and then you have a baby and that baby then anchors you and your family to the United States of America. That really was not the emphasis of this. It was much more about this idea of birth tourism. We got all these Chinese companies that come in and they send people to America. Great for business, by the way, great for hotels, great for restaurants. And then the kid's born here. They get a U.S. passport, they get a birth certificate, and then they're out. They're back. They're out. Here's the Solicitor General of the United States, John Sauer, on media reports about how many of these birth tourism companies are out there. Cut number 8.
Counsel, you mentioned in your briefing and also this morning the problem of birth tourism. Do you have any information about how common that is or how significant a problem it is?
It's a great question. No one knows for sure. There's a March 9th letter from a number of members of Congress to DHS saying, do we have any information about this? The media reports indicate estimates could be over 1 million or 1.5 million from the People's Republic of China alone. The congressional report that we cite in our brief talks about certain hotspots like Russian elites coming to Miami through these birth tourism companies. And I mean, here's the facts about it that I think is striking. Media reported as early as 2015 that based on Chinese media reports, there are 500 500 birth tourism companies in the People's Republic of China whose business is to bring people here to give birth and return to that nation.
Analysis before us.
Now, there's a Fox News piece on this. Birth tourism industry thrives in Miami as Supreme Court showdown gets underway. Have My Baby in Miami is a company, and it's a concierge service, which claims to have assisted over 2,000 international births in the United States of America. Birth tourism is big business, and these companies rake in cash. And the president's executive order wants to end this birth tourism, which refers to foreign nationals coming to America, having the baby here so that the baby can get citizenship. A concierge service in South Florida called Have My Baby in Miami provides maternity services that have helped over 2,000 international births, according to the firm's website. Now, I don't know if these kids get a discount at Disney. I don't know, because I don't know if they're Florida residents. I just don't know. I know that Disney gives a discount to Florida residents and also U.S. senators traveling alone. But I don't know if these kids would qualify for Florida Day at Disney World. I'm not sure. The dream of having your child in a country with one of the best medical systems in the world is much more real than you think, the practice notes. They prepare travel documents for all those taking part, recommending a minimum validity period of 6 months, starting on the day scheduled for arrival in the United States. The parents have to apply. They support the services. They set up the hotels. They do everything. One woman from Colombia said, "We were very pleased with the decision to have our baby in Miami by this excellent group of professionals. It was worth the sacrifice to be away from our country and our family at this important time." Now, that baby is technically, right now, currently, automatically a U.S. citizen. The question, though, before the court is, should that baby be a U.S. citizen? The parents have allegiance to their country, not to the United States. And while they're here, technically, they're subject to the jurisdiction of the United States for the purposes of following the laws. They don't have allegiance to the United States. They go back to their country from whence they came. So why is it then, if they don't have allegiance to the United States, even if they're in the jurisdiction of the United States, for the purposes of having to follow our laws, why should that kid become a U.S. citizen? That's the question. That's the question. That's why this word jurisdiction is so murky. It's not as easy as it sounds. And this was an example that I think it was one of the liberal justices raised, but it's a good point. If I go to a foreign country and I get robbed, their laws will protect me. If I steal, their laws will prosecute me. I'm subject to the jurisdiction thereof, but I'm not considered to be a citizen. I'm not pledging allegiance to that country. So then how do you square that whole issue of jurisdiction? You travel internationally, you got to follow their laws. Everybody knows that. While you're there, you're subject to their jurisdiction, but you're also not giving them your allegiance. So how does it work? Well, it's interestingly enough, most countries around the world don't grant birth citizenship just because you're born there, just because a baby's born there. Why is that relevant when we talk about American law? And that was a question that one of the conservative justices asked the Solicitor General. You keep bringing up this issue that the United States is one of very few countries that does it this way. Why is that an issue? Why is that a thing? In fact, Pew Research did a whole study on this. U.S.-style birthright citizenship is uncommon around the world. The broad language granting this is not something that most countries do. We are one of a handful of countries actually around the world that does this. In most countries, citizenship at birth is primarily determined by descent. That is by the citizenship of the parents. Most countries in Europe do it that way, and that's how it works around the world. And they say, well, why does that matter? We don't base our laws based on other countries. The Solicitor General's point is, from the government's perspective, it won't be mass chaos if the court says just because you're on U.S. soil doesn't make you a U.S. citizen if you're born on U.S. soil, because you don't have this chaos around the world. That was the point of that argument, although I don't think that it really resonates, because honestly, most of the conservative justices, rightfully so, they base American law based on American laws. We don't look to Europe and other countries and how they do it. And that's a good thing. We shouldn't, by the way. We should only focus on American law and American precedent. So the American precedent dealing with this one particular case and this guy, Kim Wong, recently his grandson or his great grandson spoke about this. Here's a little history of the case itself and how this guy was ruled a U.S. citizen, because this is really the case by which the precedent began. And it goes to this guy who then was ruled to be a United States citizen. But the court said, let's back up. Let's go back. Let's go back to how we got here in the first place. And it all began with a horrible ruling by the United States Supreme Court, one of the worst, Dred Scott. Dred Scott was a decision that said slaves are not citizens. Slaves are property. It was one of the most horrific rulings by the United States Supreme Court in history. That and separate but equal, Roe v. Wade, and also the one that said, Japanese Americans could be put in concentration camps without due process. Korematsu. Those rank as some of the worst Supreme Court decisions of all time. Dred Scott might be the worst of all of them in that sense, because it said people can be property. So you go back to Dred Scott and that decision, and then years later, the Civil War ends. Obviously, we win. The Democrats lose. The Republicans are in power now. Dred Scott v. Sanford is the law of the land. It says, you people, you slaves, you're not people. You're not citizens. So Lincoln says, all right, we got to pass a series of amendments here, 13th, 14th, 15th, and the 13th Amendment obviously has to end slavery. The southern states have to agree to these amendments or they're not getting back in the Union. And they got to agree to the 14th Amendment, which says that all people are U.S. citizens. And they mean slaves and their children. This was the way for them to overturn Dred Scott by codifying it into constitutional law. That came up today as the Solicitor General began presenting his argument and Justice Clarence Thomas asked about Dred Scott. This is very crucial because it gets to the point that the president and the administration are making, which is the 14th Amendment was never meant to apply to people who are in this country illegally, was never meant to people who were in this country on vacation, was never meant to people who fly here for the purposes of birth tourism. The 14th Amendment was ratified for the purposes of dealing with Dred Scott, of having to deal with the fact that the precedent by the Supreme Court was this horrific Supreme Court decision that said slaves are property. They are not people. They are not citizens. So how do we get around that? How do we get around that? We get around that by passing a constitutional amendment saying all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are U.S. citizens. That's why they did it. You have to realize that if you are a textualist, if you are an originalist, you go back to when they passed it. You look at the language at the time and you look at the intent of the time. What was the intent when they passed the Second Amendment? The intent of the Second Amendment was very clear, that so that an individual can have a firearm, so that if the militia had to be called up, the individuals who made up the militia were armed. That was the purpose. That was the text. That was the reasoning at the time. It was not only the militia can have guns. It was that the individuals who comprise the militia can have guns so that we can have a militia. Very important to understand the distinction. Same thing with this. Why do we have to pass the 14th Amendment? Because Dred Scott was on the books, and Dred Scott said slaves are not people. They are not citizens. They are property. How do you get around that? You pass the constitutional amendment, and you say all persons born in the United States or naturalized or subject to the jurisdiction thereof are in fact citizens. That's how you get around Dred Scott. So here's a little bit of John Sauer, the Solicitor General of the United States, his opening, and then a little bit of Clarence Thomas bringing up Dred Scott right at the start of this, because Clarence Thomas is brilliant. He's an originalist. He's a textualist, and he wants to go back to understanding why we had to ratify this amendment in the first place.
When Congress used the term not subject to any foreign power in the Civil Rights Act of 1866, it rejected the British conception of allegiance. Senator Trumbull explained that subject to the jurisdiction thereof in the clause means not owing allegiance to anybody else. And in 1884, this court recognized that subject to the jurisdiction means owing direct and immediate allegiance. The clause thus does not extend citizenship to the children of temporary visa holders or illegal aliens. Unlike the newly freed slaves, those visitors lack direct and immediate allegiance to the United States. For aliens, lawful domicile is the status that creates the requisite allegiance, and the text of the clause presupposes domicile. For decades following the clause's adoption, commentators recognized that the children of temporary visitors are not citizens, and illegal aliens lack the legal capacity to establish domicile here. Unrestricted birthright citizenship contradicts the practice of the overwhelming majority of modern nations. It demeans the priceless and profound gift of American citizenship. It operates as a powerful pull factor for illegal immigration and rewards illegal aliens who not only violate the immigration laws, but also jump in front of those who follow the rules. It has spawned a sprawling industry of birth tourism as uncounted thousands of foreigners from potentially hostile nations have flocked to give birth in the United States in recent decades, creating a whole generation of American citizens abroad with no meaningful ties to the United States. I welcome the court's questions.
General Sauer, before we get into the broader national issues, would you start with Dred Scott? Dred Scott was a case about state citizenship. It was a diversity case. And of course, we know what Chief Justice Taney did with that. How does the Citizenship Clause respond specifically to Dred Scott and answers or changes or corrects its answer as to citizenship? The other point is the Citizenship Clause refers not just to national citizenship, but also to state citizenship. Are we to have two different definitions for those? It's one word, citizens of the United States and citizens of the state wherein they reside. So as you begin, I'd like you to go back at the beginning and be more specific about the answer, and I want you to explain whether or not those two definitions are the same or related, and what state citizenship is based on.
Thank you, Justice Thomas. I'll maybe start by addressing Dred Scott. As you alluded to the fact, Dred Scott, imposed one of the worst injustices in the history of this court, and it led to the outbreak of the Civil War. It's very clear, and this court in all of its early cases interpreting the 14th Amendment said, the one pervading purpose, the main object of the Citizenship Clause is to overrule Dred Scott and establish the citizenship of the freed slaves. And if you look at the debates in the congressional record and discussion surrounding the adoption of the Citizenship Clause, what you see is a very clear understanding that the newly freed slaves and their children have a relationship of domicile. They do not have a relationship to any foreign power. For example, there's like a comment where he says, look, people have been here for 5 generations and clearly have no relationships to any foreign African potentate, or have a relationship of allegiance to the United States. And that reinforces our point that allegiance is what the word jurisdiction means. It doesn't mean regulatory jurisdiction or sort of being merely subject to the laws. They're talking and they're thinking about it in those debates about allegiance. Now, as to your second question, if you look at the text of the clause, we believe.
All right, let's stop it right there. So let's stop it right now. A couple things. Illegal aliens are not able to have domicile because they're not legal here. So even if they rent a place, even if they are living in the United States, they're not legally allowed to do that. So you can't have a domicile if you're not legally allowed. That's the Solicitor General's point. So this notion of you may cross the border illegally, you may love America, you may want to be part of America, you may have your allegiance to America, you may say, you know what, screw Mexico, I want to be an American. You may live here, you may pay rent here, but you can't legally do those things. So therefore, you can't have legal domicile. Okay, that's just why then your kids would not be considered U.S. citizens, because they would not be subject to the jurisdiction thereof, because you're not subject to the jurisdiction thereof, because you are here illegally. If you are visiting this country, you can't have domicile here because a hotel stay or a Vrbo stay or an Airbnb stay is not the same thing as a domicile. For the purposes of the law, it means you live here and you legally live here. See, in the case of this Kim Wong-Ark guy, his parents were legal permanent residents. They had a domicile. But Their allegiance, though, was really to China. So then you get into this whole question of allegiance. With the slaves, though, it was very obvious. The Republicans wanted to make sure that slaves were citizens. And you had all these people back then that turned around and said, well, yeah, but like today, Ketanji Brown Jackson actually brought up this stupid point. She's like, yeah, but what if they wanted to go back to Africa? Like, what if their allegiance wasn't to the United States? Like, what if a lot of these slaves who would be considered residents of their state too, or were forced to stay in their state, what if they wanted to go back? What if they wanted to jump on it, go on a ship and sail back to Africa? They don't have allegiance to America. They don't like the fact that they were forced to be here. So how can you give them citizenship? So that's why they got into this debate over allegiance. But the question came down to the fact that the slaves lived here. The freed slaves, because obviously slavery was over at the time of the passage of the 14th Amendment. These people live in the United States of America. Okay. If they don't want to stay, they don't have to, but they're here and they have domicile here. They're allowed to be here. And the allegiance was just understood. So when they got into that debate back then, it was really this: is your allegiance to the United States or is your allegiance to a foreign power? And if your allegiance is to a foreign power, and you're an ambassador, you're a diplomat, you're an enemy, you're a spy, you're an invading army, then yeah, you're not subject to the jurisdiction. Therefore, your kids are not U.S. citizens. It doesn't mean you had to pass an allegiance test. It doesn't mean that you had to pledge your allegiance to the United States of America. It just meant that if your allegiance was to somebody else, another foreign power. And then they got into this whole debate about, all right, well, what if you have a dual allegiance? Like, you know, I love Italy, you know, so my allegiance is split. You know, I'm an Italian. I come here. I'm a permanent resident, but my allegiance is really to Italy. I'm going to have my kid here, and I'm going to go back to Firenze, you know, or the Cinque Terre or something like that. But again, you're playing word games here about allegiance. You're playing word games. And you know that because there's a difference between somebody who comes to this country, becomes a permanent resident, lives in this country, has a kid, versus somebody who comes here for the purpose of one thing, and that is to have their baby on U.S. soil and then gets on the next flight home and gets out of here. There's a big difference. And everybody should understand. Everybody with common sense understands that. This is the big story of the day, brought to you by Dr. Mike Veneria, Veneria Dental. Go see him today for your perfect smile. Venaria, veneriadental.com. 2 locations to serve you in Cinnaminson and Woodbury. Dr. Mike is going to give you the beautiful smile that you deserve. One of the guys who was at the heart of passing the 14th Amendment, and his name came up a lot today, was a guy named Senator Jacob Howard of Minnesota. And he said about the 14th Amendment, this will not, of course, include persons born in the United States who are foreigners, aliens, who belong to the families of ambassadors or foreign administrators accredited to the government of the United States, but will include every other person. His point was, as he was out there debating this and advocating for the passage of the 14th Amendment, obviously, this is not going to apply to foreigners who come here. Obviously, this guy was a Republican. He wanted the 14th Amendment passed. He and the others who were trying to make sure that slaves were considered to be free people, that they were considered U.S. citizens, they were going on record and saying, this obviously doesn't include foreigners. It obviously doesn't include people who have allegiance to other countries. And it obviously does not include people who are here on diplomatic missions, ambassadors, etc., who have sworn an oath to another country or looking to overthrow the United States. And then they also said it doesn't include Indians either, because the Indians, they have their own sovereign land of their tribal lands, their tribal nations. And then there was some racism that was involved in all this. There were people that said it shouldn't include Chinese people. The only reason why this Wong King case ever got to the Supreme Court is because you had racists back then who said Chinese people should never be able to be U.S. citizens. That was it. It wasn't a question about the fact that he was born on U.S. soil, the permanent residence. It was, at the time, they said Chinese people couldn't be U.S. citizens. So that case really should have been just narrow in scope. But instead, it has become the basis now that is allowed birth tourism to occur, and the idea that you cross the border illegally and you're pregnant and you have a kid, that kid's automatically a U.S. citizen. The problem, as I see it for the Trump administration, though, is that listening to the oral arguments today, I don't see this court looking to overturn that case. I don't see the Supreme Court looking to overturn that case. And I don't see the Supreme Court looking to say, all right, like that case stands, but we're going to make sure that the president's executive order stands, because there's a lot of conflict between the two. The Supreme Court's precedent and then other case law that was applied after that, and then the executive order. However, I do think the president is correct on this, and I'm not alone in that, by the way. There are other legal scholars who agree. I'm not a legal scholar, but there are legal scholars that agree that the president might have a case on birthright citizenship. There was an article that was written in the New York Times today. It was a guest essay, and I read it. And the whole point of this, and I read a few different legal theories on this, was that at the time the 14th Amendment was passed, it dealt with slaves. The case that was dealt with this Kim Wong-Ark guy, that case, that dealt with the fact that they wouldn't allow Chinese people to be citizens. It was just dealing with the racism against Chinese people. That's it. Wasn't meant to open the door for everybody to come here and have their kids on U.S. soil. That was not the point. But that said, I think it's very obvious Congress needs to do a couple things here. Like, Congress needs to step in. If this doesn't go the president's way, Congress needs to step in, and Congress needs to make some decisions here. Is birth tourism legal? And if not, they need to make sure that it's very clear that that will not apply to citizenship. Now, that'll be challenging court, but who cares? Congress, I believe, under the 14th Amendment, is given discretion to be able to write laws around the 14th Amendment, around the idea of what subject to the jurisdiction means. I think Congress can pass a law very easily that says birth tourism is illegal, so therefore you're not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States if that baby's born here. And I think the Solicitor General is correct, and I think that the argument in the executive order is correct. If you do not have the legal ability to be in the United States, you therefore cannot have a legal domicile. Therefore, you are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. Therefore, you cannot be a citizen. I agree with the administration's argument on that, based on the language of the 14th Amendment at the time it was ratified. But I don't know if the court's going to see it that way. I really don't. I don't know if the Supreme Court is going to see it that way or not. It's anybody's guess. But it was a very long and detailed argument. Here's the president making his point about why he wanted to go and attend the Supreme Court hearing today and why he wants to see his executive order stand.
Arguments about your executive order trying to get rid of birthright citizenship.
And I'm going.
You're going to go to the Supreme Court
I think
tomorrow.
so. I do believe.
And just sit there and listen.
Because I have listened to this argument for so long, and this is not about Chinese billionaires or billionaires from other countries who all of a sudden have 75 children or 59 children in one case or 10 children becoming American citizens. This was about slaves. And if you take a look, slaves, we're talking about slaves from the Civil War. And if you take a look at when it was filed, all of this legislation, all of this, everything having to do with birthright citizenship, it was at the end of the Civil War. The reason was it had to do with the babies of slaves and the protection of the babies of slaves. It didn't have to do with the protection of multi-millionaires and billionaires wanting to have their children get an American citizenship. It is the craziest thing I've ever seen. It's been so badly handled by legal people over the years. If you look at the original birthright citizenship papers, they all happened right after the Civil War. The reason was it had to do with the babies of slaves. And hopefully it's going to say, because our country is being scammed. We're getting all of these people, they're selling the rights to them. People are making a big living, getting hundreds of thousands and even millions of dollars from bringing people in and saying, congratulations, your whole family is going to be a citizen of the United States of America.
Yeah, and so I think the president's correct on that point. I just don't know if this Supreme Court is going to want to overturn that Wong case. Wong. And I don't know if this Supreme Court is going to let his executive order stand if that precedent stands. So we shall have to see. I hope that's a good breakdown for you and didn't put you to sleep. But, again, I'm a textualist. I'm an originalist. You have to go back to at the time the amendment was passed, and you have to look at the language, the intent, et cetera, et cetera. They were dealing with protecting slaves and their children. That was the purpose. All right, as we continue along the show here today, we got a lot for you, not just this, by the way. I want to thank my great friends because we could not do this show, this podcast, without our friends at Emmons Roofing and Siding. They are fantastic. They have done great work for my home. They just remodeled the kids' bathroom, and it looks absolutely beautiful. And now's the time for you to reach out to Emmons with spring here if you want an American roof. American-made roofing products, American-made doors and windows, American-made siding. That's right. That's what you get with Emmons. EmmonsRoofing.com. And you get a lifetime warranty on it because Emmons is platinum certified. Platinum certified. So that means that they will have a lifetime warranty on not just the materials, but the workmanship as well. So reach out to them today. Go to EmmonsRoofing.com, EMMONS, EmmonsRoofing.com. And they will take great care of you. Make sure you tell them I sent you, okay? It's very important that you do. I want to play a clip for you. This is, and by the way, the president's going to have an address tonight to the nation. He's going to talk, I believe it's about Iran. I think so. I don't know exactly what the president's going to say tonight. Maybe he'll announce that this thing is over. That would be fantastic if he does. I for one, would be thrilled if that's the case. Perhaps the president will make that announcement. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. There's a lot of strikes today on Israel. So maybe he's announcing ground forces going in. I hope not. But nevertheless, we'll find out and we'll give you all the details tomorrow. That speech is happening tonight. All right. I want to play this for you. This is a crucial point of everything that's happening today. If I can find it for you. Yes. Voter ID. A man who wants to run for president of the United States, the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro. He's out there playing the conspiracy game. Remember I said yesterday, Nancy Pelosi's questioning how Republicans are going to rig the election machines. A conspiracy that we were told could never happen. Well, now Shapiro's jumping on board with this idea that voter ID and all this other stuff, it winds up enabling Republicans that they can cheat, and voter ID laws are going to suppress the vote. He wants to be president. He has to say these things in order to get his party's nomination. I got news for him. He's not going to get his party's nomination for a whole variety of reasons, but here's what he said.
I mean, we could cut and paste that and just use it today. I mean, look, what you're seeing from President Trump with this whole SAVE Act thing that he's doing is really designed to suppress the vote. It's designed to make certain people not have access to the most powerful tool we have as Americans, and that is the right to vote.
Okay, see that? Josh Shapiro spreading the conspiracy theory that Americans will not have the right to vote. That's what he's pushing. It's the same Democrat lunacy. It's the same Democrat conspiracy nonsense. It's the same thing Gavin Newsom sang and Nancy Pelosi sang, and they're all saying this. And like a chorus, they all say the same thing. And Shapiro's in on the action too, which is ridiculous because in Pennsylvania, as you know, you're automatically registered to vote the minute you go and you get your driver's license. That's why the whole system's a freaking mess. And I hear about that all the time. So it doesn't make it harder for you to vote. Josh Shapiro's lying when he says that, but that's what he does. If you'd like to have a daily Nazi comparison about Donald Trump, we have one for you. Because every day there has to be some lunatic on the left, whether it's an elected official or an influencer. In this case, Kyle Kulinski with his big podcast, the Kyle Kulinski podcast. This is what he said he wants to do to all of us.
No, what we need is a total reimagining of the way our politics work. What we need is a clean break. We need demagnification so people realize this is not acceptable and it's never going to fucking happen again. We need all the criminals in the Trump regime to be locked up. We need demagnification. We need to make it clear. We need to feel about what's going on now the same way that Germans feel about what Nazi Germany was. That's what needs to happen.
Okay, so we need to hunt you down, just like Larry Krasner said, hunt you down and go after you like the Nazis. All of you, all you Trump supporters, all you MAGA people, demagnification. That's what the tolerant left is saying right now. And you know, the reason why you're not going to have a Democrat who's normal get elected, win their party's nomination, is because you have so many crazy people in the Democrat Party right now. I want to play a clip for you. You know, it's everywhere. It really is. It's all over the place. And you've got these celebrities with the No Kings rally, the billions of dollars of George Soros and these other people funding these No Kings rally. They've got their next one planned for May, their May Day rally. And it's not grassroots. It's organized. It's choreographed. None of this is organic. And here's John Lithgow. And I'm bummed because, you know, I like him as an actor. Harry and the Hendersons. I mean, although in fairness, there's probably other things you think of when you think of John Lithgow. The man has an incredible body of work, but why Harry and the Hendersons just popped into my mind, I don't know. But
Third Rock from the Sun. It's a classic.
Oh, is he in that too?
Yeah, he's the main guy. Yeah.
And he was the Trinity killer on Dexter.
He was great in Dexter. Like that nice,
great in Dexter.
Approachable. Yeah.
Yes.
Also, like he used to do kids' books, like about like farm animals and stuff. He's always been, I've always had a soft spot for John.
Yeah, me too. I didn't know John was a poet though. Did you know he was a poet?
Not until
Yeah, not until yesterday. Who knew? Well, John Lithgow was busy on the No King's Day acting, so he had to share a poem with everybody to let you know that he's part of the fight.
6 years ago, in a book I released back then called Trumpty Dumpty Wanted a Crown. It's more appropriate than ever today, so I thought
Trumpty Dumpty
I would read
wanted
it
a crown.
for you. Trumpty Dumpty wanted a crown to make certain he never would have to step down. He wanted a robe made of ermine and velvet. The Constitution, he wanted to shelve it. With impeachment awash, his ambition had grown. He wanted an orb, a scepter, a throne, 6 royal palaces, 6 royal carriages, a church dispensation for 6 royal marriages, courtiers installed on his own Supreme Court, and royal beheadings, if only for sport.
Whoa!
He craved the occasional royal procession and gasped.
That got dark.
The eventual royal succession. Trumpty Dumpty gets his way unless the public has something to say. If we let him have all of his favorite things, we'll have to endure the divine right of kings.
Right.
It's amazing that book didn't land. I didn't see that on the New York Times bestseller list.
Look, I'm all for public beheadings. I've been a big advocate of them for a long time. Where are the public beheadings, though? I mean, I've been waiting for them. I mean, we're in year 2. I mean, get going here on the beheadings. Am I right?
Year 2 this time. I don't think he just wrote that book. This is year 6 from the book's perspective.
Right. Fair point. That book has aged quite well. So when do we get and 6 marriages too? Is Trump taking multiple wives? Is Melania okay with that? I don't think Melania is going to be okay with that. I'm just saying. 6 wives and public beheadings. I feel like those things are not happening right now in America. And 6 carriages. I saw his motorcade today going to the Supreme Court. He's got a lot more than 6. There were at least 35 cars in that motorcade. I'm just pointing that out. If you count all the cop cars on the side streets too, it's like 100. So I feel like John needs to up that number a tad. You know what I mean? Like 6 royal carriages, it's like 60. And also planes and tanks and, you know, all that too. So you just say it, you know, but. Where would we do the beheadings? Would we do them on the South Lawn of the White House where we're doing the UFC fight for America's 250th?
I mean, listen, you got to think about cleanup when you do these things, Rich. And like, you can't just hose that off. That is not, you'd got to definitely do that on like Lafayette Square, I would say. Right? Yeah.
Yeah. And then you got to pay overtime for the park people to clean it all up. And you know what I mean? And then what do you do with the heads? Do you put him on pikes? Do you put him on the White House pikes to warn people?
Yeah, I just don't think. I mean, it's not like everybody comes in through the front gates. You would almost have to like send one to San Francisco, send one to Miami. Like you'd have to if you're really trying to instill fear in the electorate, right?
Yeah.
Or you do press conferences and you like line them up behind you.
Like Caroline Levitt could stand there holding a bloody head in each hand and walk out and then like
100%.
throw one at fake news CNN, you know?
They should
catch.
Build the lectern out of the heads of his enemies and she can like present from it.
And every time, what's her name? Collins, what's her name? The CNN one?
Yeah.
Caitlin Collins asks a dumb question. She should just pull ahead and like throw it at her.
Like
wings
it at her.
That's Jim Acosta's head. Don't make me do that again, okay? You saw what happened to him. You're getting Don Lemon's head. You know, like,
so
that's a stupid question.
Yeah, I don't recall if we've started public beheadings now that I'm thinking about it. Yeah, I don't.
You know, Jared, they do have a bowling alley in the White House. You could use the heads for pins.
You think that's where Alex Soros has been? His severed head is floating around the bowling alley downstairs.
Oh, God. We are not fantasizing about the death of any of these people. I just need to say that as a disclaimer here for legal reasons and purposes. Is Huma's head there too?
Honestly, it's to your point, it's not a fantasy. This is more, if they're doing public beheadings, these people probably are on the list.
Yeah, I would say so. I'd say probably at the top of the list. You know what I mean? Yep. And maybe that's the president's whole play. You know, this whole time he seems so transparent, bringing the media into the Oval Office. And, it's like, let's use a Disney analogy. It's like Brer Rabbit. Don't send me to the Briar Patch. You know, you ease them in a false sense of security. And then it's like, wow, you're here. And then guillotine. You know what I mean?
You think
in the red room, it's already red. So what's some blood?
This is the long con. He's been playing the long game this whole time. He knows that he wants public beheadings, and he's playing it.
This is how he gets them.
6 years. He's like year 7. Y'all better watch out.
Speaking of Disney, do we have an update on Senator Lindsey Graham? Is he still there? Is he still on Space Mountain, or has he gotten off Space Mountain? What I love about this is that picture went mega super viral of Lindsey Graham by himself walking around Disney World. If you're not watching, by the way, you should check out our YouTube show. It's youtube.com/@RichZeoli show. Lindsey Graham wearing khakis and a button-down shirt and loafers, walking around Disney World, holding a princess bubble wand.
I believe the internet has sleuthed it to be a Little Mermaid bubble wand.
A Little Mermaid bubble wand. Okay. All right. Good to know. So then Lindsey decided to put out his own picture to counter that. And it's a picture of him holding a rifle. And he put up a statement saying, I got to do some shooting at some county in South Carolina. There's nothing better than some shooting. And apparently the internet went crazy in a variety of different ways. First of all, if you're looking at the picture, there's real question whether or not the gun is actually photoshopped because of how Lindsey's holding the rifle. We're zooming in on it close enough that based on that grip, that gun's not in his hand.
I count 1, 2, 3 fingers, and I don't see a pinky. And I think AI is not known for its hands ability there.
Yeah. It just doesn't look like he was holding a shotgun. It looks like what he was holding was maybe a Mickey Mouse t-shirt launcher, and they swapped that out and put in the gun, the rifle. I think possibly. And then the internet had fun. The internet does what it does. And this particular picture has Lindsey wearing Minnie Mouse ears, and holding what appears to be some sort of a Minnie Mouse giant bubble wand swayer.
Yeah. They were on the bubble wands. They had it. They were on it.
This one, it might be my favorite. It's Lindsey as Buzz Lightyear holding a pink ray gun.
Pretty.
Lindsey Graham as Buzz Lightyear holding a pink ray gun.
Beautiful.
That might be the best. Oh, man.
Such a tough
Lindsey,
guy.
Look, if you want to know how to properly hold a gun, you should join me at Bob's Little Sports Shop on April 12th. Lindsey, I'm extending this invitation to you. So I'll be there on Sunday, April 12th at my favorite place, Bob's Little Sports Shop, my favorite place for all things Second Amendment. They love the Second Amendment, and they love our show, and they stand for freedom, and they stand for liberty, and they stand with us. And we're having a co-ed shoot at Bob's Little Sports Shop, but you got to register. It will fill up, and I don't want you to miss out. It starts at 1 p.m. So go to bobslittle.sportshop.com right now and sign up and join me for the co-ed shoot on Sunday, April 12th at 1 p.m. You don't even have to shoot. If you want to just come and say hello, that's fine too. Check out the store, say hi, we'll take a picture together. If you're an experienced shooter, great, we'll get some range time in. If you've never shot a gun before, like Lindsey Graham, and you're interested and you'd like to learn, and nobody's going to make fun of you, you don't need a firearms ID card, no experience necessary, just register and come out on April 12th. bobslittle.sportshop.com. Right in Gloucester County, in Glassboro, New Jersey. Great people, great selection, best selection of firearms you could ever find. And I'll see you there on Sunday, April 12th. Okay?
And
there's no justice like internet justice.
They
What's
do
that?
Women only shoots for Lindsey, right? He'd love that. That'd feel great.
Yeah, that's true. They do women only shoots, and if you'd be more comfortable waiting for that's fine too. That's certainly, again, just go to bobslittle.sportshop.com and you can, and maybe Kristi Noem's husband would prefer that as well. I'm not quite sure. Front cover of the New York Post today. What a boob. The bimbofication kink of Kristi Noem's hubby explained. Apparently Brian Noem, Breon, was putting on the fake tatas and having explicit messages with these fetish women. There's this subculture out there that I wish to God I never knew about, where people will inject. It's like, I have so many problems in my life. I wish I didn't know about this, but you know, there's a lot of weird subcultures, I'm sure, in a country of 350 million people, a lot of weird kinks and fetishes. I don't want to know about any of them. I really don't. And now I have to know about this. People inject themselves with silicone to look like Barbie. Yes, that's right. And he was sending messages to these people that do this, some men, some women, and he was showing them his boobification and doing all this. And they were making the point, you know, not for nothing, your wife is the Secretary of Homeland Security. What if somebody got a hold of these messages and tried to blackmail your family? And blackmail the Secretary of Homeland Security of the United States of America. In other words, while it's fun to make fun of this boob, there's also an actual national security risk here in doing this. And like, I get it. You're feeling a little cuckish. Your wife's out there with Corey Lewandowski on a private jet. I get it. At the same time, though, you putting on fake tatas to go online and send messages to people that inject themselves with silicone might be a national security risk. Just saying.
I would like to commend the people in that chat. I, for $1 million, couldn't have picked Kristi Noem's actual husband out of a lineup. Someone in that chat got sent the guy, with the big boob pic, and they said, I think I've seen that guy before. I think I know who that guy is. How somebody pulled that out from those internet chats and that's what's crazy to me. He looks like every other, look at this guy. Looks like every other white guy in DC. I would have never figured out who that guy was.
That means it's somebody within the Barbie boob fetish silicone injection community recognized the husband of the Secretary of Homeland Security and said, I'm going to make an issue out of this. But I feel like within that community, there's probably a code, don't you think?
I would assume
somebody violated that code.
There's got to be a boob code. But also the amount of people in the middle of that Venn diagram, Rich, of people who know who he is visually and people that are in the Barbie boob community. It wasn't that many people that could have had access to this information.
You know, Jared, I thought we would never hear the term Venn diagram ever again after Kamala Harris left the campaign trail. Never in a million years would I have won the bet that we would hear it again. And in relation to Kristi Noem's husband, wearing fake boobs.
That was it. That was obviously what was going to be next.
This is clearly the president is going on TV tonight to announce the world is ending, and they're taking him to the bunker in paradise. And good luck, because there's no way we can recover from this. There's no way. As a species, we can't recover from this. As a planet, we can't recover.
Awful.
Let me raise the level of this a little bit with something a little more serious. So Erik Prince, who is the founder of Blackwater, murderer extraordinaire, someone pointed out. These guys tend to like ground forces because they tend to be them for hire. Even he's warning against using ground forces on Kharg Island. So let's hope that that's not what the president's going to announce tonight in his address. And by the way, I would love it if the president were to take a shot at Kristi Noem's boob husband and just be like, before I begin, I got to get this out of the way, and then make a couple jokes and then get right into it. I would appreciate that.
Trump should come out.
The Noem family is asking for privacy at this time, by the way.
He should wear one of those things, come out, and then reveal and take it off, like the Superman.
And then be like, I just got you. I'm kidding. Stop it.
So yeah, your initial assault at the Kharg Island is going to be mighty thin because those aircraft have to cycle, and that's assuming you don't have any losses from maintenance or from missiles. Do you do a mass drop of the 82nd on the Kharg Island? Again, that's pretty sporty, and an airborne invasion in a place that has thousands and thousands of missiles. Not to mention, the Iranians have been learning. They've certainly been paying attention to modern drone warfare, and have certainly implemented FPVs down to the squad level. I mean, you see videos of the Israelis in southern Lebanon losing tanks, losing armored personnel carriers to the same FPVs that the Russians have been using with great effect in Ukraine. So it is, again, a fight against Iran. They're not Arabs. They're Aryans. They are a highly intelligent, highly skilled warfighters. And it would not be the pushover by comparison that you see of the Iraqi army that worked.
Well, I think he's right about that point. So let's hope that that's not what the president announced. I would love to see this wind down. I think we all would at this point. Well, all of us except Lindsey Graham. Anyway, that's the key. I just want to circle back. I hate that phrase, but in case you're just joining us, and some people join late, and this is the beauty of this podcast, you can always listen on your schedule. All you got to do is subscribe. All you got to do is follow it. So it's the Rich Zeoli podcast. So if you're listening right now on the radio, please, when you get home, take a moment on Apple or Spotify, or check out the YouTube show. Just put in my name, Zeoli, and search for it, and it'll come right up, and then hit the subscribe button. That's the easiest thing to do. The Birthright citizenship case, if I'm making a prediction, I'm predicting a very narrow interpretation by the Supreme Court, and asking Congress to basically step in and make some decisions regarding what subject to the jurisdiction is, and to formally pass a law to end this birth tourism thing, and to come out and make some laws around this. That's probably my guess if I had to take. But I read this wonderful essay. We alluded to it earlier in the show. Trump might have a case on birthright citizenship. It was by two legal scholars, Randy Barnett and Ilan Werman. And Barnett's a law professor at Georgetown. Werman's a law professor at the University of Minnesota. It's an excellent piece. I spent all day today not just listening to the oral arguments, but reading various different constitutional scholars on both sides of the aisle. But I just want to point this out. The executive order's exclusion of children born to mothers who are lawful but temporary residents is a more complicated question not addressed here. And whether Congress ought to grant naturalized citizenship to children born to those illegally present in the United States is a policy issue, distinct from whether the 14th Amendment has already done so. the Supreme Court has, in a footnote, presumed that the 14th Amendment's jurisdictional phrase applied equally to people who are here illegally, but the issue was neither briefed nor argued in that case, nor was it material to its outcome. When they finally consider this question, the justices will find that the case for Mr. Trump's order is stronger than his critics realize. The parents who are in the United States may have allegiance to the United States. They may love the country, but they don't have legal domicile claim to the United States. So what Congress could do here is Congress could essentially now pass a law that says if somebody's in this country illegally, in other words, they don't have domicile, their children are either A, citizens, or B, not citizens. Congress could do that. I think the 14th Amendment gives them the ability to do that. And it'll be challenged in court. But I think based on what the justices were alluding to today, they would like to see Congress step in here and kind of answer some of these questions. I think Congress could absolutely 100% pass a law that says you can't come to this country strictly for the purposes of having a child, for that child to become a citizen. And they could easily do that by saying, this is what we mean by domicile. And they could codify that under federal law. That will also be challenged in court, but that's okay. I think Congress under the 14th Amendment has the power to regulate aspects of this, and I think that they should. Well, I can't predict how the Supreme Court's going to rule, but I can tell you based on the arguments today, they are very sensitive to overturning the precedent from that case involving that Chinese man who was ruled a citizen. Okay, I think Congress under the 14th Amendment has the power. They are very sensitive to overturning the precedent from that case involving that Chinese man who was ruled a citizen, that the original text of the 14th Amendment, really the president's executive order, is very much in line with what the intent of that today. We shall see how the court rules. One lesson I always remember is never make a prediction based on oral arguments, because of the president's executive order, but ultimately says to Congress, you got to sort this out, because there is this precedent on the books that we are not. I will be back tomorrow for the analysis of President Trump's speech tonight. What will he do on Iran? Thank you.
Let's go.